Hi everyone, glad to see you back on the channel. Today we're talking about a story that many thought would never be told in real time, a story about accountability in the middle of a brutal war, and about people who believed distance, chaos, and denial would protect them forever. Russia's war criminals thought they were safe, hidden behind uniforms, ranks, and borders. Ukraine proved them wrong. From the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, reports of atrocities began to surface. Civilians killed in occupied towns, mass graves uncovered after retreats, families destroyed by indiscriminate shelling, and evidence of torture, execution, and forced deportations. At first, the world struggled to grasp the scale. Information was fragmentary, emotions were raw, and the fog of war made verification difficult. But Ukraine did something critical very early on. It treated justice as part of its war effort, not something to be postponed for a distant peace. While fighting for survival, Ukraine began collecting evidence. Testimonies were recorded, satellite images were preserved, phone intercepts, social media posts, and abandoned documents were cataloged. Every liberated village became a crime scene. This wasn't random or emotional revenge. It was systematic, methodical, and aimed at one goal: ensuring that those responsible would eventually face consequences. Many of the perpetrators believed they were untouchable. Some were low-level soldiers who assumed anonymity would shield them. Others were officers who thought orders from above absolved them of responsibility. Higher up the chain, commanders and officials believed that power, propaganda, and Russia's veto at international institutions would protect them forever. History had taught them that accountability was rare and slow. Ukraine set out to prove that assumption wrong. As Ukrainian forces pushed Russian troops out of occupied areas, the full horror became visible. Places like Bucha and Irpin shocked the world. Streets littered with bodies, hands bound, signs of execution at close range. These were not battlefield accidents. They were deliberate crimes against civilians. Ukrainian investigators moved quickly, often under continued shelling, to document everything before evidence could be destroyed or manipulated. What made Ukraine's approach different was speed. Instead of waiting years, Ukraine launched investigations almost immediately. Domestic prosecutors worked alongside international experts. Legal frameworks were adapted to handle the sheer volume of cases. This sent a powerful message. Justice would not be an afterthought. It would move in parallel with the war itself. Russian soldiers who once filmed themselves looting homes or boasting online suddenly realized those videos were now evidence. Social media posts meant to intimidate Ukrainians were being archived by investigators. Calls intercepted on the battlefield, where soldiers casually described killing civilians, were turned into transcripts for future trials. The very arrogance that made them feel safe became the tool used to expose them. Some war criminals tried to disappear. They changed units, rotated back into Russia, or blended into civilian life in occupied territories. Others fled abroad, believing that as long as they stayed outside Ukraine, they were beyond reach. But Ukraine understood something crucial. Modern war leaves digital footprints everywhere. Borders are no longer walls when data, witnesses, and international cooperation exist. Ukraine issued arrest warrants and shared evidence with international bodies. Names, ranks, and faces were identified. This wasn't about collective blame. It was about individual responsibility. Each case was built to stand in court, not just in headlines. That distinction mattered because it separated justice from propaganda. One of the most significant developments was Ukraine's cooperation with international courts and foreign prosecutors. Countries across Europe began opening their own investigations under universal jurisdiction laws. This meant that if a suspected war criminal entered their territory, they could be arrested and tried, even if the crimes were committed elsewhere. Suddenly, travel became dangerous for those involved. The sense of safety that Russian perpetrators once felt began to crumble. Officers stopped posting photos. Soldiers became paranoid about phones. Some reportedly destroyed documents or tried to erase online histories. But it was too late. Evidence had already been mirrored, stored, and verified. In trying to hide, they only confirmed their guilt. Ukraine also pursued justice on the battlefield in a legal sense. Captured soldiers were interrogated according to international law. Those suspected of war crimes were separated from ordinary prisoners of war and treated as criminal suspects. Trials began inside Ukraine, conducted publicly, with defense lawyers and transparent proceedings. This wasn't show justice. It was deliberate, lawful prosecution. Each conviction sent shockwaves through Russian military circles. For the first time, soldiers saw that I was following orders, was not an automatic shield. Testimonies revealed how commands were issued, how civilians were targeted, and how refusal to participate was often possible but ignored. These trials stripped away the myth that individuals had no choice. Beyond the courtroom, Ukraine understood the importance of information. The stories of victims were told to the world. Survivors spoke about what they endured. Families described loved ones who never came home. This wasn't done to inflame hatred, but to ensure memory. War criminals thrive on silence and forgetting. Ukraine chose exposure instead. Some Russian perpetrators believed that time would eventually wash everything away. Wars end, attention shifts, and the world moves on. Ukraine challenged that belief by building institutions designed for the long term. Databases of crimes were created. Evidence was preserved to standards that would remain valid decades from now. Even if justice took years, the trail would not go cold. International pressure increased as well. Sanctions targeted individuals linked to atrocities. Assets were frozen. Travel bans imposed. For many, this was the first tangible consequence they faced. Life became smaller. Opportunities vanished. The realization slowly set in that their actions in Ukraine would define the rest of their lives. Ukraine's pursuit of justice wasn't only about punishment. It was also about deterrence. By showing that crimes would be investigated and prosecuted, Ukraine aimed to prevent future atrocities. Soldiers who knew they could be identified and held accountable might think twice before committing crimes. This psychological impact mattered on the battlefield. The hunt for war criminals also extended to collaborators and those who facilitated crimes. People who provided lists of civilians, assisted in deportations, or helped run torture sites were investigated. Ukraine made it clear that participation at any level carried responsibility. This further dismantled the idea that safety could be found in the shadows. As the war continued, new crimes were documented. Missile strikes on residential buildings, attacks on energy infrastructure during winter, forced transfers of children. Each incident added to a growing body of evidence that pointed not just to individual soldiers, but to systemic policies. This opened the door to accountability at the highest levels. For Russian leadership, this was deeply unsettling. The narrative that everything was legal and justified began to crack under the weight of facts. International reports contradicted official statements. Independent investigations confirmed patterns of abuse. The gap between propaganda and reality grew impossible to ignore. Ukraine's determination inspired others. Human rights organizations, journalists, and independent investigators joined the effort. Open-source intelligence became a powerful tool. Analysts used publicly available data to trace units, identify commanders, and link them to specific crimes. This collective effort made hiding nearly impossible. The idea of safety evaporated further when extraditions became a real possibility. While Russia itself refused cooperation, other countries did not. A war criminal stepping onto foreign soil risked arrest. Even allies grew cautious, unwilling to become havens for internationally wanted individuals. The world was shrinking for those involved. Inside Russia, fear quietly spread. Families of soldiers worried about future repercussions. Some veterans avoided speaking about their service. The pride once associated with participation turned into anxiety. This social shift mattered because it eroded the normalization of violence. Ukraine also emphasized fairness in its pursuit. Not every Russian soldier was labeled a criminal. Many were treated as prisoners of war and eventually exchanged. This distinction reinforced the legitimacy of Ukraine's actions. Justice targeted those responsible for crimes, not an entire group. The emotional weight of these efforts cannot be overstated. For Ukrainians who lost family members, justice offered a form of recognition. It acknowledged that what happened mattered, that suffering was seen and recorded. Even when punishment was delayed, acknowledgment itself carried power. There were setbacks, of course. Some suspects died before trial. Others remained beyond reach. International processes moved slowly, but Ukraine refused to be discouraged. Each small victory reinforced the principle that crimes would not simply disappear into history. As months turned into years, the narrative changed. Instead of war criminals feeling untouchable, it was victims who felt empowered. Survivors came forward knowing their voices would be heard. This shift in moral momentum mattered as much as any battlefield gain. Ukraine's approach also reshaped how modern conflicts might be judged in the future. The integration of technology, international cooperation, and rapid evidence collection created a model others may follow. It showed that accountability does not have to wait for the guns to fall silent. For Russian perpetrators, the message became clear. There was no true safety, not in occupied territories, not back home, not abroad, not even in silence. Every action left a trace, and every trace could be followed. This relentless pursuit has already changed lives. Some war criminals now live in constant fear of exposure. Others face trials that will define them forever. The myth of impunity has been shattered, replaced by the reality of consequence. As the war continues, Ukraine's hunt for justice continues alongside it. It is not driven by vengeance but by principle. The belief that even in the darkest times law matters, that humanity matters, and that crimes against civilians cannot be erased by uniforms or lies. In the end, this story is about more than Russia and Ukraine. It's about whether the world accepts that power excuses brutality or whether accountability can still exist under fire. Ukraine's answer has been clear from the start. Russia's war criminals thought they were safe. Ukraine hunted them down, not just with weapons, but with truth, evidence, and an unyielding commitment to justice. And that hunt is far from over. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel.